Yeah, great to be here. Really happy to see a group of what I call mission-driven entrepreneurs trying to solve the world's problems, primarily in climate tech. And it's good to see so many stakeholders behind you supporting the work that you're doing. So just a bit of background on myself. I've been in Asia for nearly 30 years, 23 in mainland China full time, Beijing starting point for 18 months. Then after the first pandemic, SARS, I moved to Shanghai, where I wrote out the last one that we've all experienced. Along the way, I've had what is not considered a trajectory that is considered linear. I have created a portfolio of different things I've been involved with, starting with nonprofits, social enterprises, academics, podcasting. I'm involved in a lot of different things, in part because I view, and I'll speak about this in a bit more detail, the problems that I see are very tangible, they're very systemic. I view that there are many modes by which we can attack them, and I've just kind of taken it upon myself to spend my time on these because I really see the potential impact to myself, my community, my country, the environment writ large, and I just love working with the people in this space. So I'll be sharing a little bit more about this in a bit, but this is my general background. Starting point, I think, climate tech, carbon is evil, global warming is going to kill us, and we need to save the polar bears. This has been a narrative that I've been teaching around, part of since 2006, 7, 8. Went to Copenhagen in 2009 for COP15, teaching sustainability, working with a lot of brands to solve these. But I want to zoom out a little bit and focus away from carbon as the sole focal point, because for me that's an externality of what something that I've come to understand as to be sustainability is, and that is really sustainability of systems. Now, I noticed that you guys are from all over Asia. I saw Jakarta, Manila, Thailand, and the first time I went to most of these countries was in 1995. And if I think about all the progress that has been made in this region, in the cities, in the populaces, and oftentimes in the economy, even if they're unbalanced at times, it really is an incredible thing. But for that to happen, all of our systems around food, energy, water, labor, waste, healthcare, education, these all needed to shift dramatically. And for the last 25 years, I've been kind of watching that happen. And as these systems scale, at times, obviously, they have failures, they have externalities, they have, what we came to know in 2014 in Shanghai as crazy bad smog. But the problem that we should be focusing on, or that I've chosen to focus on, is more about the systems rather than the byproducts at the end. Although it's the byproducts at the end that tend to catalyze us as individuals, as organizations, as governments, to take action against these problems. That could be food safety, air pollution, whatever it may be. And so that's kind of really framed how a lot of the work that I've been doing, and it'll frame some of the things that I'll be talking about going forward. And that's not to say that the carbon, global warming, polar bear, or really 3 degrees isn't important. It's just that hasn't been, until a few years ago, really the thing that I considered to be the golden thread. It was systems, sustainability, macroeconomic development, and then how do we kind of ensure long term. And so I have someone who's got their microphone off, if they could maybe mute themselves. So fortunately, I've had an incredible experience learning through clients, working with clients, understanding the challenges that they face in corporate sustainability. And I was asked to speak a little bit about this and then frame it back to entrepreneurs. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time and use some of the examples of the work I've done as ways to show you the opportunity I see more for entrepreneurs and innovators, less so as an advocate for corporate sustainability. The frameworks that have been involved often, really start with an idea of assessment to scale for the corporate. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what their problem is. They haven't necessarily assigned capacity and resources. And so my role is really to help them develop capacity, find pilots, and come to scale. Now, throughout this time, I would say that we've seen so many different frameworks and issues of focus and things that we need to focus on right now, but then next year is something new. And there's been a lot of confusion around what is the common goal? What is the best framework? What can we do to continue moving forward, at least in the corporate space? And I will be honest, when I was talking with Danny yesterday, I was like, I was a little bit struggling because in my view, most of you have already figured that out. You figured out what your issue is. You figured out how you want to do it. Your problem is actually getting that done. Where with corporates, they're kind of responding to everything. They've got governments telling them one thing, citizens telling them another, consumers telling them that they want something different, and it changes at all times. And that's why we've come up with so many different frameworks in the corporate world to kind of bring these things into focus and to kind of figure out what strategy and tactics can go forward. So SDGs, that came out. And then, you've had all kinds of different ESG, circularity, scorecards, TFCD, all these different things that come out that corporates can grab onto as the current thing that will help them get a little bit further. Now, hopefully, as I'll show in a bit, there's often a lot of times there's an on-trend movement. So we've heard a lot about, say, ESG recently, and then the fall of ESG recently. We've heard, the plastic was the huge issue, and now it's not an issue. And so one of the things that I've found through the cycle is that oftentimes the issues continue to rotate. Oftentimes the frameworks continue to rotate. And so when I'm talking through this, the important thing is not necessarily to memorize each framework or to grab onto one specific thing, but to maybe take some principles away from here. And I'll do my best to capture those for you. But, we've had all kinds of different frameworks come into play. And what I look at is like, at the end of the day, we need to be figuring out for each of our organizations, our communities, our personally, like ourselves, what is it that's important, and start to deploy those tools against those. And again, as entrepreneurs in this space, I believe you're already there. I'm just trying to explain what I'm seeing and what I've seen in the wider body of work. And so if I go all the way back, corporate social responsibility really was the foundation for most of what corporates are doing today. It was the idea that, the primary function of business, Milton Friedman, is to make profit and return that to the shareholders. That's your job. But if doing that job, and through doing that job, you give away a little bit of money, and that brings back benefit to the company's brand, culture, soft skills, and you're addressing a social issue that is a gap that's important to your ecosystem, well, then you should be involved in that. And that was one tool that started. A couple of years later, another Harvard economist came out with the idea of creating shared value. This is a little bit further down the CSR route, but it was still the primary role of business is business. And it's to seek business opportunities in these gaps instead of just giving away money. You want to find a nice balance. And then from there, we heard about triple bottom line, that actually it's not about just giving money away. It's not about doing a little bit of things and finding one business model or one product that might address some of these issues and is in balance. We should all be in balance. And people, planet, profit, triple bottom line. Like these were things that, people started to espouse, and you started to hear a lot about how companies were shifting their business, shifting their culture, shifting their products, shifting their supply chains to be more in balance. And I think there's a lot of things that were behind this in terms of consumer awareness, the climate movement, plastic in the oceans. A lot of these emotional signals were driving that. And what we found was a lot of companies would start to try to say that they were aligned with that. Now, I was always skeptical of a big organization who was saying that, but small to medium-sized founder-led organizations was where I thought this framework fit in really well, because you found that individuals who were able to say, this is our vision, this is my vision for the organization, and have that power to find real balance, that's where we saw traction, and that's where we saw like B Corp come out and some other frameworks. But creating shared value and CSR, these are things that moved away from the public's average talking points into, and from branding, more into internal HR culture, where people planet profit, that has also been about culture, but that's also about leadership in many instances. And, I won't say it didn't do any good. I built several charities off of these trends where I was able to effectively build a business model where corporates who were seeking to engage communities would, basically work with my nonprofit. They would do corporate events, they would pay us a fee, and then I could take that fee and then apply it to the other side of the business, which I'll show you later, which was student volunteering, individual volunteering, community volunteering. And so the 20% of volunteers would pay for the other 80%. And that was what I would call, you might call it, a social enterprise. In reality, we were always a nonprofit. The goal was just to find a business model that was sustainable, because in many parts of Asia, and particularly in China, we couldn't do individual fundraising at the time. So we kind of leveraged that corporate sustainability movement to build a new organization. But it wasn't necessarily solving problems. And I'll highlight, Nike, and these are the Samsung workers or Foxconn workers. Corporate sustainability, corporate responsibility at the time, it was more externalized. It was more for what's happening outside. It's when we have time. It wasn't necessarily changing real business models yet. 1997 in Indonesia, you have the Just Do It, labor scandal where Nike got caught up, and this is really the first time where they realized that a business model can't be that out of bounds with expectations, regulations, and also the idea that regulations weren't really keeping up. And so the point here was, for a lot of these frameworks, they didn't really change the business model. Business practices were still allowed to continue, but because they were donating money, they were volunteering, they're trying to find a couple products that would be in balance, maybe a process in balance, the core business itself hadn't changed. I'll give you an example of work that I did around this area that I think actually pushed that barrier, and I think had real potential to change some things. Target, some of you might know, it's the second largest retailer in America behind Walmart. And in China, they have about 3,000 suppliers. These suppliers are producing everything to go into these stores, and China is the major sourcing operation, but they operate in Indonesia, Philippines, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. They're really a global organization. And about 7-8 years ago, I started working with them on factory labor issues. Now, they were way beyond compliance. They were doing things that were beyond the regulation. They looked at corporate social responsibility as something that was, just the basic. What they want to do is beyond. And so we did beyond compliance work with them. And we tried to figure out, what were the issues that they were facing within the supply chain that were social in nature, but then were feeding into productivity, feeding into the supply chain, feeding into labor costs, feeding into labor turnover, feeding into the business. How could they align themselves, address a social issue, and bring real benefit, systemic benefit, back to their business? And one of the things that we landed on was the fact that in China, you had about 60 million left behind children at the time. And I know a lot of ASEAN countries face similar, although some unique experiences, but there was basically about 60 million children at the time who were separate from their parents. These parents were working in factories, working on construction sites in other cities. They'd see each other maybe once or twice a year. And like every good company does, we had a hackathon. And what we did was we actually engaged students to be part of this process. We came up with new ideas because factory training was no longer what they wanted to focus on. They wanted to find a way to get beyond the factory trainings, beyond the old CSR programming. And we came up with a ton of different ideas on how we could use technology to not solve the issue, but address it, to mitigate it, to understand it, and maybe to close the gap a little bit, with the idea that if it was done appropriately at Target, we could actually make this a pre-competitive program for the entire industry. They would allow Walmart, anyone that wanted to come in, they could join this platform. And so after that hackathon, what my team and I did was we did a ton of research. And honestly, this right here is probably not unlike what a lot of you did. You had an idea, you ideated what are the 3, 4, 8 different ways that you want to attack that challenge with a bunch of Post-it notes, and then you go out and do research. And so oftentimes through my consulting firm, I would do these kind of entrepreneurial, activities where I'd go out and figure out, how do we solve this? What's the business model? And for this particular thing where it was, labor oriented, we met with factories, we went to schools, we did hundreds of parents interviews, we met with teachers in rural Sichuan rural, Chongqing rural, Yunnan, and then we did a lot of parent surveys in factories and out of factories. And the idea was trying to figure like, what's the pain point that we should actually be focusing on? What is it that we can do to solve this problem? And then from there, what's the business model, or how does this come back to the business? So we come up with a map of needs: educational, community, emotional. And again, like, how do you solve this? If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business, what's the thing that you can do? Because you can't do it all. And there were so many important things that were happening. But what we came down to was like the role of communication. And we did that because we realized that oftentimes the parents had no connection to their children. And that was a huge source of anxiety, a huge source of social pressure, a huge source of turnover, because there was a lot of guilt there. Some people had no interaction at all for months. And some were super guilty and trying to figure things out, but they just didn't have the ability because they had to pay their bills. And this would show through the relationships in many different ways. So we came up with like our theory of change, like this is a systemic challenge, this is the potential impact, this is how we'll do it, and if we do it, this will be the benefit. Now again, most CSR programs, most triple bottom line, most CSV, they're not doing this. They're just trying to figure out like how to do things that are non-systemic. And we looked at this saying, they've got 2 million factory workers, how can we deliver that? And that was our challenge. So we built an app like most tech firms should do, or most agencies trying to be tech firms should do. And then we went out to the village and we tried to figure out like what's the actual need? Like, can these kids use an app? And can they use technology? And can we even deploy this? And what's the business model here? And again, like it was so fascinating because it was through these interactions. This was actually the most important focus group I ever had, because when we got there, we realized that, the app that we had in mind wasn't feasible, but there was a way to change, there was a way to create that same connection, and that was through these 4 watches here. Now, I don't know how you've seen these before. They were really popular in China for a number of years. I saw a few of them in Southeast Asia, but these are basically phones on their wrists and GPS devices, and they have a few games involved and a step tracker. And what we realized was these kids are already communicating. Now, one of the big reasons why they weren't communicating was because either the headmaster or the grandparents were in control of the phone. And so what they would say on every Sunday when you talk to your mom or your dad is like, don't talk too long, don't tell them about that thing. So there was all this like, no one would ever talk. But when we started to watch these girls who were wearing these watches, what we realized is they were actually talking to their parents very openly. And so we changed our entire business model very quickly so that we could just have these watches. Because building an app, which we did, cost us 25 grand US, and then there's obviously ongoing operation costs, but each of these watches was only about $25. And pre-pilot, we actually went out and measured how often they talk to their parents, how often you talk to your kid, how close you feel to your kid. And what you can see is on that second one, they didn't feel very close at all. On average, a 5, maybe a 6. Very few felt a 10, almost as many 1s and 2s as there was 10s. But within about 2 months, we remeasured, and what you can see is a huge shift. And what we can really draw back to is, if you look at the pie chart, that is the frequency of communication: daily, weekly, monthly, less than monthly up top, or multiple times a day, once a day, every 2 to 3 days down below. And what's incredible to see is how a weekly call, which was an average of 3 to 5 minutes, moved to multiple times a day, once a day, or every 2 to 3 days as the minimum standard. It replaced all that. And so the communication became, much more, it became richer, it became more in depth, it became more honest, and the connection between the parents and the child within 2 months just took off right away. And this showed through here. And what was interesting was that this output here was the exact same as if the parents lived together near factories as migrant families. Now, I only mention this because at the end of the day, we had to kind of come back and figure out what the business model was. And what we realized was like the factory managers themselves love these things and we would test this. We would send watches to one building in a factory complex, but not to another. And the one that got it would be super energized, super happy. The parents were lighter, less strife between management, factory management, and the staff. And within about a week, these factories that were kind of hesitant to engage in this program were calling us back saying, we need watches for everybody. It really did change everything. Now, at the end of the day, I will say this program was actually canceled. And the reason why it was canceled was because the company had a strategic shift, and that was away from connecting families into something that was more strategic in nature, more supply chain oriented. And this became one of these things where I realized that CSR has its limits. And my role as an entrepreneur is to figure out other business models, other funding mechanisms that I could have kept that program going, which I'll talk about a little bit later, because I know that funding is an issue for a number of you, or it's been expressed as an issue, and you're probably thinking about this. And I learned so many lessons through that. Taking CSR one step forward, obviously, the plastic issue, smog, many things, carbon, has driven corporate sustainability forward. And so I want to shift from CSR, CSV, social side, to more the environmental business side, because over the last 10 years, many corporates have made a jump from external, like the things that I'm doing are not core to my business and aren't necessarily going to change my systems. It's meant to be more like, it's a nice to have when we can do it. To corporate sustainability was a tactical management shift, where it's like, we need to change our systems. Now, there's a spectrum of people and organizations that are doing things lightly, and there's groups that are doing complete revamps. I'll show a couple of examples, then we'll get into a discussion after that. But I've been really fortunate, again, like just had amazing work at the business model level for firms who are trying to, one, figure out what, like with DSM, like who are the stakeholders, what's important to them, how does it align with us, to a group like Interface who's trying to figure, like, we have this waste, how do we solve it? And then there's definitely been a move to from management to strategy when it comes to this. And I'll talk about, well, I think I'm missing a slide, sorry. Okay, so I'll have to go to this one first. So the circular economy is one of these frameworks that comes out of the sustainability movement, where corporates now and wider policymakers are trying to figure out how to close the loop on waste, or how to make sure that these wastes are never actually waste, that they're upcycled, that they're equally cycled, that sometimes that they have to be downcycled, but that nothing is wasted, that everything is a resource. And one of the best definitions of waste I ever heard was just, it's a misplaced asset. It's never actually a waste unless we refuse to recognize it as an asset. And this is Ellen MacArthur. She has she has some great models for this. She has biological, technical, material flows, systemic flows. But for me, having been in Asia for so long, these frameworks oftentimes are a little bit too academic. They're not quite so practical in their nature. And so for me, what it came down to, when I wanted to understand these, what these frameworks actually meant is for me to go out to the ground again, go understand what's happening in the systems, follow the people that are involved that we've been talking about as needing help, or that we're not supporting well enough, or that we're impacting with our business models, and try and figure out what's actually happening. And so I spent about 18 months with my team following informal recyclers around Shanghai. And actually I've done a bit of this in Bangkok, a bit of this in Jakarta, and I'm now trying to arrange this in Manila as well, some formal studies. Because what we started to find was that there's an incredible economy for waste in the region, in part because there's so much manufacturing. So what is a sustainability topic, or even a CSR topic for global brands at the global level, is actually a business model for many in this region, but also for those organizations who are here. Like, there's a disconnect between the global goals and the local reality. And so what we just started to do is just try to understand, like, where are these materials going, what's happening to them, and then from there, like, what are the pain points and what are the solutions? And it was just incredible to see, like, how materials flow through a city, flow through an economy, and then flow back into the market without regulation, without commitments. It was just, it's a valued resource. And as long as the market was allowed to assess that value and place value and bring it in, it was done naturally. The question became, if you are a corporation, how do you inject yourself? Or if you're a government, how do you create a policy that supports that? And often what I found is that they do the opposite. They'll build a policy and it kind of disrupts the economic model. We actually can see more waste in the short term. So I've always come down like the fundamental questions of, say, a waste model, like when you're trying to solve that internally. And I think this is true for any sustainability strategy, is like, what is the waste that we are creating? Like our people, consumers, our products, our process, our suppliers, like what are the wastes? Oftentimes we see this on the street, we see this in the air, and that's what we hook up to and say we need to solve that. But what are the actual wastes? What's the spectrum of waste? And where does the waste go? Or how is the waste even created? Like, why is it generated? Is it a design problem? Is it a manufacturing problem? Is it a user problem? And really understanding like these fundamental questions of like, at the system level, as a brand, as a consumer, what is actually happening behind the scenes? Because I think it's very easy to hook onto a turtle and a plastic bag and say, I'm going to fix that plastic bag, but you're missing the wider picture of fishing nets. Or you're saying, I'm going to fix the carbon problem, but you don't fix the SOx NOx problem at the same time. Like, we need to be thinking at systems level. And that's where I think like these projects have just offered so much insight for me on how to do it. And then from there, what happens to it? And then leading to the last question is, how can we do better? Oftentimes sustainability was sold as, this is the solution. If we just do these three things, we can all make a better world. The reality is, it's chipping away. And if I look at all your business models and all the ideas you have, each one of you has something really interesting and something really unique that is not the solution to all of our problems, but when we add them up, if we align them in the right way systemically, we're going to find that you're making a lot more impact. And so this gets back to kind of vision and strategy. And I'm going to try and end it on my corporate talks here in terms of like how corporates are looking at the challenges and how they're looking at their responsibility. If I take CSR, CSV, triple bottom line, circular economy, throw in ESG, have sustainability in there as well, it doesn't really matter. Some of these are frameworks, some of these are tool sets, some of these are lenses. But what's really important is, how does an organization see their role and see their responsibility for acting against that challenge? Now, go back to 1997, Nike, defensive compliance. Apple, the same for 2007 to 9 with their factory scandals in China. And I've seen steel and real estate producers in other parts of the world that are doing the same thing. We comply with all laws. It's the industry, it's not us. And we'll move if something compels us, if the investors tell us, if our consumers tell us, if regulators tell us. Now, for those firms, CSR is really the basic, or it's compliance and regulation, but it's not trying to solve problems that have a wider spectrum outside of their four walls. For them, the role of their business is to deliver the most amount of return to the shareholders or to the consumers or to whomever, without doing anything wider about the challenges that we face. The second group is going to be called management strategic. And that's the group that's like, okay, CSR was good, regulatory is okay, but we need to be ahead of this. We see water as a problem. We see the consumer's perception of waste as a problem. We see the emissions from our products as a problem. We get it. And you know what? We're going to do something about it. Now, it's a process. We're going to learn through it. And some of them will say, we want to be the leader in. And I'm sure that some of you know brands who've put that out. And you start to see those hero products or these hero factories coming out. Like Lego has one factory that's off the grid. Great. What about the other 5? IKEA has one product that they can circulate. Okay, what about all the other ones in the catalog? And so we're starting to see where some companies they really understand that the future is really attacking these issues proactively. It's also about an opportunity to lead, but they still view leading oftentimes in a branding system versus at the material, economic impact system. They're not solving a real problem yet, they're solving their problem. And then the last one is really core growth. They realize, and this is where I'd put almost all of you, it's your vision to change this system. It's your vision to solve this problem. No one else is acting. I feel like it's my responsibility to try and figure out how to do it, to raise the money, to build a product, because I know there's a better way. And honestly, I really view like this is, if I, when I mentioned the work that I've done corporate-wise and CSR and limits, the problem is I rarely find a company that goes core growth on anything ever. It's very difficult to find because they're subject to stakeholders like regulators who tell them they can't do certain things, or investors who say you can't go too far, or consumers who say I won't support you if you go this route. I want my old products. I don't want the new ones. And that's can be beer in America, it could be EVs, it could be all kinds of things. But then there's those groups who realize like that's the market, and that could be organic farming, that could be vertical farming, it could be carbon, it could be like there's all kinds of new business models that have come out over the last 8 to 10 years where entrepreneurs I've seen are coming to scale, and I'll talk about them in a minute. To highlight this, let's talk about plastic. You have CEOs who will, like this is the Unilever CEO, and he's making a commitment of 10 vending machines where you can return their products and get a credit. And like that's nice, but it doesn't solve the systemic issue of Unilever. And then you see where some groups like, well, we'll collect the PET bottles, we'll create ready-to-wear materials out of it, which again, like it does a bit better, but it doesn't solve the full cycle of, say, and this is from H&M, of their fast fashion business model. It's doing a bit better. I can't argue with some of the results, but it's not systemic change. It is just one step forward, or maybe one step closer in their model, but it's not what we need as communities, environments, economies, and societies. And that's where I come back to, if you've never heard of Interface Flooring, I'm going to introduce him because Interface was a hybrid. It was a $1.5 billion company in the 90s. I think it's like a $3 or $4 billion company now. It was founder-led, but it was also listed on the NYSE. So it was a public company. It had external stakeholders and shareholders who helped drive strategy, but they were a carpet company. And at the end of there was a moment where Ray Anderson goes into what would be the second largest commercial building in the world to sell his carpet. And they ask, what are you doing for the environment? And at the time, he was in defensive compliance mode. And he said, we comply. We comply with all the laws. And this group said, well, hey, that's not enough. We want something more. And we are the biggest market for this product. So I'm sorry, we're going to have to go to somebody else. And he talks about how losing that business and then the conversations after led him to what was a huge transformation. And that led to a few things. And so I'll show the strategy, but over the course of about the next 20 years, he completely revamped the company from we comply to we contribute. And this picture is not of him throwing ocean nets into the ocean. It's ultimately the company figuring out how to use ocean nets as part of their process. So his first step, was to basically create what he considered Mount Sustainability. That's Mount S, with zero footprint, zero waste, zero virgin materials. That's the goal by 2020. And this was like in the mid 90s, so 1995. So about a 25-year time frame. And like many corporates, he actually, went in-house and he pulled out all the charts and he could show like waste to landfill going down, recycled content going up. But it only get them so far. It wasn't really changing the business model. It would get them halfway there, but not all the way there. But on a regular basis, they made continual improvement. And what ended up happening was not just that they made sustainability like a way to progress and to save money and to make nice little changes to the business model that mitigated or reduced risk, but actually as a company, they became more innovative. In the middle here at the top, you'll see airplanes. It takes, usually every airplane needs a carpet change 3, 4, 5 times a year. To do so, you put it in a hangar, you take out all the seats, you take out the carpet, put the new carpet, put the seats in, 3, 4, or 5 days lost, multiplied by 3, 4 times a year, and he'd worked out how they could do it at the gate because they created modular carpets. So he was able to solve a big problem of waste while solving a client issue, while solving an environmental issue. The tactiles at the bottom, if you ever go into a new office, you'll smell all the adhesives from the carpet. And what he worked out was, well, okay, first off, that's not good for the people that work there. It's not good for the environment. There's got to be a different way. And so they redesigned their carpet tiles to be from flat to kind of concave because they studied geckos and how they kind of stick their fingers to the walls. They have 4 points of adhesive instead of an entire layer. And again, he was able to help his clients clean their buildings faster, get LEED certification, do a lot of different things because they really looked at the environmental as just, that's the way to trigger their process. And then the last real innovation I really love is the picture at the bottom right of the netting became the picture at the bottom left, the carpet. And this was done in the Philippines, and I believe they expanded to India in the early 2010s, where they went and worked in a Filipino fishing village, and they had found that nylon number 5 is used in the fishing nets in that region, but they were often being ghost netted. And there was kind of like a 28, 30-year-old MBA student who was working internally to the organization, took this as their project. They wanted to figure out how they could really close the loop on plastics and create circularity then. And they had worked out that these fishing nets from a Filipino fishing village could be used in their process. And so they started purchasing them. Now, as part of this project, not only did they create a circular product and did they remove the waste from the system, they also started solving social issues, because these fishing villages, they didn't have, most of the people that were involved in the program didn't have a bank account for the first time. They now had a second source of income. They were able to educate their children and build a school in the region. Whereas if you think about like the old CSR model, they would have just donated money and kind of walked away. But using the corporate system and understanding the pain points that were being faced and really being open to ideas of innovation and business model, material, and how they invest behind it, they really closed a lot of material loops. They solved some social issues, and they actually put their company in a better position long term, because as this product was coming out, the LEED certifications were giving credit for recyclable materials. And so they put themselves ahead of the competition. So for them, it wasn't CSR, it wasn't CSV, it really wasn't triple bottom line, although you might be able to put that in the framework, but it was really core to their business. His vision was to get to zero by 2020. Now, punchline is they were like 7 to 8% short. They didn't make it. They recommitted to be there by 2040, recognizing that they were able to complete a number of the projects, but they still had some things that they needed to fix. And the one big thing that they needed to fix was they needed to get their consumers or their buyers to get off of the purchasing carpet as the only mode for engagement. They needed to find ways where they could create leasing arrangements and a circular relationship where if you give me the carpet back, I can then give you a credit and really change the economics of the consumer relationship. They didn't make progress there as they thought they would. Had they would have made much more progress towards their zero goal. And this for me is like kind of where I think that mission-driven entrepreneurs, for me, are where things get really interesting. All these frameworks that I just showed you, and I apologize, I know I showed you really quickly. I just want to try and get as much out there as possible so that we can kind of figure out how to help you guys a little bit more. For me, all these frameworks have gaps. We are facing climate change, and I have 2 podcasts, one of which I talk to sustainability people at the very top level, and I talk about 3 degrees, 4 degrees warming. In Southeast Asia, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, Manila, Jakarta, I've been to all these in the last year, and I've pulled all the stats. You can see that all these cities are seeing not just 1 degree, but 2 and 3 degrees rise. Water, drought, flood, migration, labor, like all these challenges are coming to a size, scale, and speed that's growing faster, but yet these corporate frameworks haven't really been keeping up. Which is why for many years, I've been focused on understanding social entrepreneurs in the region, or what I call now mission-driven entrepreneurs, in part because I gave up on the idea that a legal structure matters. Nonprofit, for profit, I don't care anymore. What I care about is seeing entrepreneurs, individuals, or in groups of, like-minded individuals coming together to address these challenges. So I actually built a podcast starting in 2018 around these groups, which I'll show the QR code for later if you're interested. But I want to focus on the work that's being done in Asia, largely by Asians or Asian-based entrepreneurs. Like, I was kind of tired of the idea that you need a global organization, a global team, a global representative to come in and talk to the problems here and have a solution for. There were so many amazing things happening here. So I've interviewed 150 and put those out on YouTube, and I've learned a lot through it. And so I'm going to talk now much more about that, because for me, that's where you all are. And I think it's much more relevant. I've started to really distill, not just in my own experience as an entrepreneur building multiple organizations, but, and not all of them went well. Some of them have done very well, and some of them really struggled or just, went as zombies for a while. But I've started to distill like some principles that are important to success when it comes to building out your vision. And I'm going to throw this out there, but then I want to dive into a few topics a little bit more directly. And again, like, I realize I've thrown a lot at you. I'm happy to slow down right now if you guys want to take a few questions or talk through what you're seeing or dive through it a little bit more directly. I'm more than happy to. Just feel free. All right, so broad stroke. I think it's important to understand, and the way that I see it, there is no one problem. Every one of you has a vision for, or see something out your window, or you have a single focus that you're trying to follow. And the idea is like, how can you take this, your single effort, or maybe with a couple of friends, and expand that to solve, hopefully, a system. And then hopefully, I'm talking to individuals who are looking at scaling out of your own home market across ASEAN, across Asia, across in other areas, be it through tech, through product, through process, through people, whatever it may be. I've just come to understand, like, there's kind of 5 key things that if I'm talking to an entrepreneur one-on-one, I'm really understanding more about their business model and their mindset. I can really understand more broadly, like, what the potential is. So the first one is they have a real solution. You know what the problem is, and it's tangible to you, and it's real. I think oftentimes, if I go back to the problem I've had with carbon, is that for many years it was intangible. We need to address carbon to save the polar bears. But now, as global warming is coming to really the forefront, not of a topic, but as a reality, like, we're seeing the typhoons get stronger, like Yagi just went through the region. We're seeing, the impacts to agriculture. We're seeing the impacts to water. There is a more direct connection now between carbon and those systemic shifts, and therefore the problem is becoming more real to those who are willing to support it. So the solution, its tangibility, is now more real than it's ever been. And I think that's fantastic. And that can be true of food, water, labor, whatever it is. It's like the challenge here is to identify what is a real problem versus today, versus what's a problem that's 20 years from now that I'm going to build to. And there's different approaches, but what I found is that it's the entrepreneurs, the organizations that are able to show that problem is a today problem or a very near-term problem, and then have a solution to address it. They have a much higher chance of success, of finding traction in the market, successfully piloting, and finding scale. The second thing they need to have, if I'm thinking more of kind of idealistically about the entrepreneurs in this space, is they need to be thinking about scale. If you look at the ASEAN picture, if you look at Asia more broadly, the amount of people coming into the cities, the way the systems are changing, the energy required, the water required, the food required, the transportation shifts required, there is nothing but scale coming right at us. And it's either going to go maintain continued challenges that grow in size, scale, and speed, or it's going to be something that we can address as an opportunity. And for me, when I look at these systems, I don't really get too bothered about what the potential downside is. I start to try and think about what are the opportunities for me to look at a technology, a product, a process, a human shift that can then come to scale as well. And from there, what are the business models for scale? Like if you're a tech platform, that's great. If I look at if I go back to the Target project that I was mentioning earlier, we start off with China. We had all this great content, but then we quickly realized like this isn't just a China issue. In the Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, India, we saw similar patterns. So we started to translate all the apps. But what I realized, like translation wasn't enough. You had to localize. You had to really figure out like, how does this technology interact? Am I on the right platform? Does it look the right way? Am I saying the right things? And so scale sometimes can be a very copy paste, like you're selling one product. But oftentimes, if you're talking about technology, you need to consider how you're going to scale across geography, across systems, and what that will do to your product or to your process. You need a great team. There is nothing, if there's one thing I've learned by being a solo entrepreneur, it's that without a team, without co-founders, without a team that serves as co-founders, and we're all emotionally involved in this, and we're all on mission, you're not going to get very far. And there's a couple things that I feel undermine this, and I'll talk more deeply about this. But one is that you have a micromanaging founder who thinks they have the idea. I will tell you, 95% of them lose. And some of them have been spectacular losses. I saw a friend go from 600 people to 20 in the last 3 years. In part, not because he didn't have the right vision. It's not because he didn't have the right product. He had more funding than he knew what to do. He kept killing the people around him with the way that he managed them. He would micromanage them, he'd tell them what's going on, he'd scream at them, and people just left. And if you look at his Glassdoor review, it's just this awful thing. But then there's these groups, and I'll link later to some of the interviews I've done where they talk through this. One of my friends, he went from 20 to 75 people in 5 years, then 75 to 302. No, 75 to 150 in 2. They went back to 75. Now he's at 300. And he realized along the way that he was that micromanager, that to actually succeed, to come to scale, to solve more problems, he needed to step away as the founder or micromanager into building a team that is empowered and effective. Now, I'm going to link team back to your solution very quickly. If you have too many products and your team is too thin, this can be a real challenge. So what you need to think about is as you're building your organization, the products, what's the appropriate size team? Who needs to be involved? And what power should they have? And what resources do they need? These are really critical questions. There needs to be a process. Oftentimes I find, like getting back to the idea that you have too many solutions, if you have too many things going on at once, you rarely have a process that you can rely on. And process, I found, is often the determining factor for the ability to stabilize, to learn, and to make improvements over time. It creates brand, it creates teams that have real ownership over a process, because most entrepreneurs, they don't want to deal with the process, they want to deal with all the new stuff. And these things are all interlinked. And by having a process, it's easier to come to scale. If everything is customized, everything is one-on-one, everything relies upon, your client giving you one different spec, it's very difficult. It's very human intensive, very team intensive to really come up to a scale that I would argue most of you are trying to address right now. That could be carbon credits, that could be the circularity, waste to waste that I saw. You need to have a real process that could be automated, that can be measured, that can be learned from, that can be improved on. If you don't have a process, you can't really do that effectively. You can say, well, that last project didn't go well, and I hope I can do this one better, but the inputs and the outputs are so different. There's nothing to be able to compare against. And then you also need to have speed. I think this becomes the real challenge. I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel compelled to run really fast and run ahead of their team, but you have to be able to find a way to do this in balance. Right now, I'd argue none of the business models I saw and still continue to see are unique. What's unique is the ability to bring it all together in a way that understands the real issue, solves the real issue, brings teams together that can run quickly together, and then aligns the funding later. Versus funding up front, figuring out what the team should look like, and then trying a bunch of different things. There's so many elements here that if you get these things right, if you have a good process, you have a good team, you're going to have speed. If your team is falling apart, you're going to lose momentum, and that speed will result in what I saw my friend go through, which is this deconstruction process where you can't really get traction anymore. You are the leader, you have the right idea, but because you haven't got your team and process nailed down, you're unable to maintain the speed to bring your solution to scale. Now I'm going to dive into a few things here as examples. So let's see. So I'm just kind of flicking through to remind myself where I am. So I started off years ago when I was in high school volunteering, and I really kind of understood that, when I looked at my first organization of volunteering, that you could really change the world with simple human interaction. So this is a kid sitting by a school in Shanghai, waiting for parents, really, really unsupported at a very dirty school, into something where you have one-on-one mentors. This is an individual from Cisco who could really help solve that student's educational challenges. And so I developed a Rising Star program where we had 12-month commitment. Every 2 weeks, these mentors would work with their students. And that became kind of the foundation for a platform that I didn't even plan for. Like it grew into 25,000 volunteers, spread out all over the city. We had 75 beneficiaries across the city. And it started off with like hospital playrooms. It grew out. And honestly, all this was organic. It was off a couple of people. We had a really solid team. It was built on passion. We were very clear about what the challenge was. The challenge was, engagement in communities, and the idea that we are part of the community, and the more that we give, the stronger the community is. And we just built off that. In a couple of years, we had 25,000 volunteers, going, $40,000 a volunteer a year. Now we're at like 60, 75,000. And we grew. Like we had Shanghai, Hong Kong, Beijing, Chengdu. Things are going really well. And it just taught me a lot about growth and phases of growth. And so right now, like if you think of like phase one is it was a group of friends. It was the founding team. And, it was all part-time, it's weekend, it's side hustle. We were all kind of bouncing off each other. We're all feeding off each other's passion. And then, over time, we started to bring on a few more. But again, it's 100% passion, 0% funding, no process. And it could break apart at any point because one of us gets a better job, or one of us has a child, or one of us has a health emergency, or one of us just gets bored, or whatever. Phase two is when we kind of hired the first team and had the first hire. And I can still remember negotiating with my first director, who's now my board chair, after 21 years, she and I have been working together. And I was sitting there thinking, like, this is the most amazing individual I could have ever hoped for. And she wanted 50% more than what I was willing to give her, or what I had budgeted original. And, eventually, like someone asked me, like, how much would it cost you if she didn't join you? Would it cost you more? And it just changed my idea of the value proposition. And so, see something coming in the chat here. And hiring that first team member, she became really the person who could bring process, bring stability, bring a common point of contact. Oh, sorry, just checking the question here. A common point of contact, and allowed me to focus on things that were more about the business model, focus on what is it that what was our growth model? Who else were we trying to hire? Like the organizational stuff. Because at first I was like, oh, this is a nice club of people. But then I was like, wow, this is actually something. We have something here. Let's grab onto it. And then we were kind of, we were all 100% passion. We were actually 67% vegan very quickly. We had two members of our team were vegan. I wasn't, but the other two were, and we had 6 months of funding. So I had the first hire, a couple team members, and then things were they were growing. Phase 3 is when we came to full expansion, and this is where I needed a full team. When we had 25,000 volunteers, that couldn't be done on Excel and email and a nasty website. It had to be something professional. It had to have real process. We had to have trainings for our volunteers. We had to have a back end to manage it. We need to have people on site. We need to have people who are account managers. We really started to need different things. And as that expansion happened, we need to make sure that we were actually not just building a culture, but we learned how to manage. We learned how to lead. We learned how to, get the organization right. Still had 6 months of funding, as it is put there. 50% passion because people had jobs then. And I think this is something that if you're building your organization, you will probably start to understand is as you grow, you'll go from this core mission-driven organization of 5 people, 8 people, 10 people, to then you'd be like, well, I need a professional accountant. I need someone who has a job. And they bring a different energy to the room. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if you're not seeing that, if you don't understand that you have 5 people who are coming from corporate sustainability into your space because they want to try something different, and that energy that they bring that's different than the young, driven, we need to solve this issue, you're going to have an imbalance in your team at that point. And that's going to create a multiple culture effect. That's going to create a management challenge. That's going to create internal politics. So it's really important to understand what I have come to learn before you expand, to think about the team that you want, create job descriptions, talk to all your team members, figure out what are the type of people that they like. Not that they should dictate it, but you definitely need to be aware of who people like to work with and who they grow through and who they like to interact with, so that you can build a team that reflects your values, but also can bring together process, bring together speed, will drive high energy, because that just has so many impacts. And we did that. We got up to about 25 people at one point, and we had a 1,000 square meter office, not 10,000 square meters, 10,000 square feet. And we were just expanding cities and programs and partners. It was fantastic. And in part because I would sit down and try and figure out where are we now? And where do we want to be? And these things mapped not just the people, but the products, the stakeholders, the cash flow models. How are we going to grow? What did we want to achieve? What resources did we need? What do we have in-house already? That was in blue. What did I need in place? That was in red. And I spent a lot of time, not just internally and trying to figure out on my own and with my team. I had one member of my team, all they did was look at our sister organizations around the world, or very similar organizations. How were they structured? What were the lessons they learned? I talked to other executive directors to try and figure out how I could learn through this. And as an entrepreneur, I cannot understate the value of talking to other entrepreneurs about their growth. Now, right now, if I have this correct, you guys are all in roughly similar phases, but finding mentors or finding like-minded individuals, or say someone, you're in the carbon space or in the waste space, and they've even succeeded in same space, but a different business model. Figure out the lessons of their expansion. There's so much power in the community of entrepreneurs to learn from each other, because I've actually seen, not this organization, but another one, do the exact same process. I led it through there and then it failed. But the problem was, because I've never really been one to talk to other entrepreneurs about the challenges I was facing, I didn't understand the signals. And it was only 3 months after it happened that actually a couple of my friends were like, Rich, come on, man. That's natural. Here's what you should have done. But now that you're here and it's already destroyed, here's what you can do. And so there's real power in community to figure out, as you're expanding, what are the things that you should consider? If you have a co-founder, great. If you don't, find others. Zoma, question.
Yes, hi. Let me lower my hand. Thank you so much for the presentation so far. I'm loving everything that you just said. I think the issue of expansion needs one whole session in itself.
Oh
Just
yeah.
putting it out there. And I like how you actually mentioned the vegan part. Um, why did you, why did you put that up as a percentage? I found that very interesting. But I can
Um,
see that it was going down, but I mean, like, and the passion part too. And
yeah.
I feel like the energy part is the one I'm really super interested in. It is
Okay.
definitely a key changer in so many different things. So if you can maybe add a bit more about that, please, thank you.
Yeah. So first off, let me apologize. I teach or I have a course right now I'm developing called the Mission Driven MBA, which is a 10-week, 1 week, one topic thing. I'm mashing about five of them into one because I saw the list of people you've already heard from, and I've seen the list that you're going to hear from. And I just want to try and bring it all together. And I apologize. I'm speaking fast. I'm running through it. But if any of you want to connect with me for a half an hour, I'm more than happy to. I'm here for the entrepreneurs. So that's why I'm just blah for the last 45 minutes. To answer the vegan question, because it became really interesting. We had, at one point, we were like 25 people. We had three different types of vegans. We had vegans who would just, no animal products. We had some that were Jain vegans. We had other, and it was like, but it was part of the culture. It was part of the uniqueness. Sometimes we had fun with each other. And I only mentioned because at the time, it basically meant that you had like one group who were just on mission, and they were, these were very devout people. They were amazing contributors, but I could never eat with them. And as the founder, what I would say is, particularly the Jain vegans, that it was really difficult. We would do it as a larger group, but it became a little bit more difficult at times because they would bring their food to work. And so it's just a matter of like, when you're building the culture, it's not that being vegan's a problem at all. It's just understanding like you have these unique things. Now, I'll carry this to my group, Collective Responsibility. We did about a year of food waste and packaging waste projects. But my team, they were bringing in so much food delivery, I was pulling out my hair, and I don't have much left, right? And so I was like, look, guys, once a week, because I traveled to Indonesia and I've traveled to Thailand, I saw how teams ate together, how there was prepared food. And so I said, in China, we don't have kitchens in our offices. So I said, let's do a potluck, or one person cooks for all of us. And honestly, I got in a lot of trouble for this because what ended up happening was everyone had different dietary restrictions and whatever. And I was commenting to a friend of mine how everyone thought they're going to die from everybody else's food. And I sent that in a text message, and he sent that to a group of people. They went back to my team. And I wasn't making fun of them. I was just talking about how hard it was to take a simple thing as a founder that I wanted to bring people together to talk to each other over food. Now, the good thing is after I pissed them off, they never invited me to lunch again. But they started having lunch together in the conference room, bringing their own food. So, okay, lost the battle, lost the war. I don't know what happened, but I think these are the things that you really have to pay attention to. And this is where micromanagers fail so miserably. They don't think about the people. They see the output, they see the process, they don't see enough progress, but they never sit down and have lunch with their people and understand them and try to really figure out, like, why are you here? How can I help you? What is fulfillment? I mean, sure, money is important, but what else? And then, oh my God, you're going to leave me at some point. How can I make sure that you end up in a better spot? And I think all of these things are really important as you're growing, even though as an entrepreneur, this is probably the greatest weakness of most entrepreneurs that I talk to, or if it's not their weakness, it's the thing they like talking about or working with the least. It's the people. Oh my God, HR. Oh my God, the personalities. Oh my God, the millennials. But it's a privilege to have these people in your house. And if you understand that, you can grow a movement that's not you, it's us. And I think like that's why I kind of threw some of these things in there. I think it's also, I was throwing some of these slides together kind of last minute because I was trying to figure like what are the angles, but everything is important. And I don't want to dismiss anyone's, uniqueness that they're bringing to the organization. That is something that we should be celebrating. On the other side of that, what I recognize is when you ignore that uniqueness, you ignore that need, you ignore what's important to them, you can take super passionate people about your mission and turn them into your biggest, like they hate you. And it's not their fault. We deal with very emotional, tangible topics, and we want to solve them. And you can see a fracture where when I disrespect you, you'll go the opposite way with it. And sometimes that can be very innocent. It can be something you didn't pick up on, but other times it can be very direct. And I think that's important as a founder to understand. Make sure you're hiring the right people. Make sure you're managing them well. Make sure you're leading them. Make sure you're inspiring them, but also make sure you're listening to them. Because if you don't, the team will start to fall apart, and that expansion will only happen with them. If your team falls apart, you lose momentum, you lose process, you lose credibility in the market because your biggest clients are going to come to you through your teams talking about your collective work to solve the world's problems, not you going to a chamber of commerce or to somewhere else and saying, hi, this is my PowerPoint. And so I see like little chat messages, but I can't click into it. So if you have a question, just throw up your hand and I'll know that works. Let's see here. Okay, so then phase 4, if you don't get this right, we call it contraction. And I went through this several times for different reasons. But for this one, we'll call it cash flow. And I'll talk about fundraising in a bit, but we actually hit a wall. We were selling, we had great products, but I had a mismatch between our accounts receivable, our cash flow payments, and the amount of people that I had built out. We had, it's 15, I think it was 25 full-time staff. I had successfully, as a founder, brought in another executive director to take over kind of like the CEO role, and she quit on a day's notice. And she'd been in the organization for a year. I've been very hands off. The board was running it. I take a separate seat on the board to stay back because I'm trying to let the organization find its own feet. But what I realized as a founder, you need to be there to support that person, not to manage them, but to support them, to help them understand the vision, to help them vent when they're having a bad day. And I think like as a founder, I kind of missed that. So she quits. At the time I was really angry, but I really don't blame her because I realized like these are things that I should have known in advance. And yeah, we weren't paying attention to the money that she had been spending in ways that we weren't really factoring in all the things. So we had to contract. We were done at 2 months of funding. That hurt. But then we came through it. It took about 6 months. I had to get more involved. My chairwoman, she had to get more involved. We had to come back into the organization. We had to save it. We had to do what was right. We took care of our team. We walked them through what was going to happen. But then we made some really hard choices to come back so that we could be ready for the next round. And what I'll say is, when you're going through it, if you've never gone through this before, I can tell you it is incredibly stressful. If it's your baby as an organization, you will lose sleep. You will be stressed. It will impact you. But I hope that you'll kind of keep, and you'll find mentors, you'll find people around you that can help you understand, like, this is normal. It's not your fault. Every organization goes through this. And if you can just make some hard decisions now, you'll be in a much better place in 5 years. And it's really important to kind of keep these messages because you're going to have team issues. You're going to have funding issues. That's just normal. But how you as a founder take that and process it and act on it is, again, that's a key determinant of success. And I've learned that. I'm a little bit older than all of you. Actually, if I add a couple ages together, you're probably about the same age as me. But this is something that I learned in my 40s. Even after being an entrepreneur for 25 years, like it doesn't always happen right up front when you're in startup mode. It can happen later through expansion. Now, I'm gonna get into fundraising really quick. I think this is my last section, and then we can actually get into a more substantive conversation that's related to your own organizations, your visions, your missions, the people you're hiring, the funding that you're struggling to find. But I just want to ask, like, how many of you recognize this pattern? You raise some money, you spend some money, you raise some money, like you're stuck in this oscillating pattern. I recognize this really early on. And again, nonprofit particularly, but obviously the last 5 years of running a sustainability agency, no different. Feast and famine, feast and famine, feast and famine. Now, I'm going to make a distinction between fundraising, let's call it friend, families, and fools, VC, angel, mezzanine, exit, like fundraising. That's different than operations. That's different than your business model. And so I'm going to talk through those two things because I think oftentimes we've kind of been led to believe that all you need to do is fundraise successfully and you'll be fine. Actually, fundraising for me is nothing more than the push behind your car to get it rolling. And at times, you need a lot of push behind the car to get it rolling faster so you can come to scale. But at the end of the day, you still need gasoline in the tank. And so you could have a friend be pushing the car, but if you don't have gas in the car, if you aren't responsible with that gas and managing it, they're going to stop pushing as well and go find someone who's willing to help. Now, my charity and my corporate organizations, I've created mixed business models, and I'll talk about some things that I've just learned through that. So I'm sure you recognize this. Okay, so just in the funding cycle, fundraising, proof of concept, startup capital, some of you in this space. Friends, families, and fools, business plan competitions, angel fundraising, chambers of commerce. Like these are event or single check events on the small side. The proof of concept is basically funded off of your vision, off of your passion, off of your story for where the world is broken and how you're going to fix it. If you just give me $25, just give me $10,000, just trust me, and I promise not to waste your money. And that's why I love that stage of entrepreneur, because they really have to believe in themselves. And I interviewed, some of you might know the Plastic Odyssey, a boat that's been going through Southeast Asia the last couple months, a French team, and I think he was about 30 years old when he started this. And he had fundraised something like $2 million off of his passion for solving ocean plastic. And I was like, how did you do this? How many doors did you have to knock on? He's like, well, we started off with a business plan competition that was for $1,000 so we could print t-shirts. And I'm just laughing because it's like, how do you get from $1,000 to 2 million? He's like, passion. You talk to people, I asked him, how many people did you talk to? He's like, I don't know, but my success rate was 1% to get to that 2 million. But he's actually raised 15 overall so far in this time of about 5 years, I think. And it was incredible. Like, again, I'll link to the podcast that dropped last week. It was just this incredible conversation with someone really young who should not be trusted with this much money, but successfully convinced so many people that it was their mission to join him and to give a little bit of money. And he knocked on doors and knocked on doors, just didn't give up. The second area of funding I call kind of strength and capacity. This is where it's not about your passion that's driving the funding. It's about your ability to create something that is that shows progress. It's a pilot that went really well. It is a product that has garnered some interest in the market. It's like we're not insane. Like this problem exists, and there's a market for this product. Hey, can you give us some more money? And that group, I mean, you can look at the larger social enterprise competitions like Schwab and Skoll, Shoka. You know, like some of them can bring you 100,000, 250,000, a million, and that would all go again. Like, there's no expectation of equity or debt. We're going to give you this money so that you can get to the next stage, which is beyond pilot or system level or a portfolio, whatever it might be. Some foundations might come in here as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I really viewed corporate foundations, nonprofit foundations, multilateral foundations, and government foundations as a really great pool of funding that not enough entrepreneurs tap into, because they are what really is considered patient capital. They have the vision or the challenge to solve waste, carbon, whatever. And if you can align to those foundations, you can write grants. Now, it may not support your product, but it might support your product development. So you can go to the UN and work on, like with UNEP, on their ocean plastic problem, and you can get a $15,000 grant, a $100,000 grant to do some research on consumer behavior, on informal waste recycling, on transportation, on whatever. You can use that as a way to fund some of your R&D. And I found like I've done this a few times, and man, it was great, because all they want is a report. All they want is a clean project out of it, but you can get capital that helps you understand your market better, understand your product better, help your team do their job better. They get to do all these interviews and research. It's a great way to build capacity. And so that was like a second way that I really look at these things. Then you have growth and scale. Now, obviously, this is kind of on the older side of social investment funds and equity investors and revenue streams. Like when you're 3 years in, you better have a real business model at this point for how you're going to replicate a sale of the same product, the same process, the same whatever. So that way you can bring those resources to stabilizing your team, stabilizing your process, maybe expanding a little bit, but really focused around that single idea or that single medium of change. And I find like if you can do that well at that growth and scale phase and get that late stage, 3 to 5 year funding, you're going to set up your organization to have, again, a much higher chance of success. You'll at that point hopefully have 10, 20, 50 people kind of on the top end for most companies I know at that stage. But 10 to 20, like that's a great place to be at 3 years, and to be there stably is just, that's fantastic. So let me get into the business models as kind of one of my last slides here. So there's multiple business models. Top left, this beautiful child. Consumers, they want to buy organic, they want to buy cleaner, they want to buy safer, they buy more environmentally friendly, they want to buy tuna safe or dolphin safe. They're willing to give you their money. Could be $5, could be $1,000 if you are, say, in ecotourism. Now, for that model, you have a product that you're delivering to the market at a market price, and you have to meet market expectations. Now, the question is going to become, if you need to make 100 sales and build your organization, or 20,000 sales, you just need to really work out, like retail sales is fickle. Things move. So you're going to be in a constant adjustment, and you're going to have to figure out that price range and whether or not you're going to make money. And that gets back down to how much money do you have to invest, or how much backing do you have, how much time do you have, and is there a real market for this? And I think early on in sustainability, a lot of brands thought that everyone cared. Everyone wanted to save the turtle. Everyone wanted to save the world. And they would buy organic, fair trade, plastic free, whatever it might have been, as the reason to purchase that. And they would pay a premium. But I think what we found is the markets are much more difficult than that. And actually, if you want to, like, so somebody, you said I skated over funding and skated over team, skating over this business model is another one. I've got 6 different sustainable consumer segments that I apply. And that's only 6 of 100 that I could really, if I had funding to go through and figure it out. There are so many different types of consumers. New family members, if you have a new child that's 2 years old, the world is trying to kill it, and you'll buy anything to protect that baby. But if you're in yoga and you are health conscious, anything that goes on your face, in your body through food, the pharmaceuticals, the yoga mat, the Lululemon, it's all has to be aligned to your, as a consumer, your vision. Now, if you can add in ocean plastic and you can add in, like, hey, great. They'll spend more because they tend to be individuals who are willing to pay a premium because it's directly related to them. But if you're trying to convince someone to spend money at a premium to solve a problem that's not direct to them in the consumer market, that's where your business model becomes something you need to really think about. And what products you're developing, how much money you're making, how do you distribute, how global can you be? These are all really important questions. And again, happy to go through them later. Corporate, that's where I've probably excelled more than anything else. Corporate buyers, B2B buyers, wholesale buyers, they're fantastic. They buy in bulk. They may not pay at 40, 60, 80% premium as say a consumer might, but they'll pay you 20, they'll pay you 40. And if you can work out a process, you can make a little bit more out of it, but you don't get paid today. You get paid in 30 days, 40%. You get paid in 60 days, 20%. You get paid in 180 days, 100%. They have more power than you. They have a much larger purchase. But the other nice thing is corporates, if you're delivering services, you're delivering products to them, it's often really clear what is required. Their specifications are usually pretty stable, 3 to 5 years, and they have a single process. They have a single person that can make the payment. They have a single address that you can deliver the goods to, the services to. And so you can get a measure of scale through that. And I remember when I was doing my waste research, the fact that I was doing the Adidas project with all their textiles, that brought in Nike, that brought in others. And so one brand can bring in other brands. When I talked to Target, that brought me CNA, that brought me several other retailers as well that wanted to do the same Left Behind Child program. So it's a consistent product. And honestly, most corporates have very similar sales pitches. So the need of Adidas to solve textiles is no different than H&M, is no different than Nike. Now the locations might be different, the materials might be different, the size of the problem might be different, but the principles of solving their waste issue, not all that different. The way that you would structure the arrangement, the amount of work required, the formula, probably not all that different. It's something that would be familiar enough to you that you could make the sale over and over and over again, but time intensive. UN, ADB, ILO, I mean, we operate in a region where there are so many multilaterals, Japanese, Korean, European, American, some Chinese. There's a lot of money in that space. And as an offshoot to the Target program, I had actually worked with the ILO on labor issues, and I had a really specific project where there was gonna be about a $5 million budget involved. And that would have been huge. I could have hired like 40 people for that because it was multi-year. But I needed one person in that system to agree to it. And after 6 months of working with them and going through the system as an external, it came to be that that person's boss had a competing product already. So all that time gone. And it was even after the donor country had agreed to this. We had everything. All we needed was a signature. But that person that needed to sign it, they had the ability to wipe it out. So you can deal with really large sums, or you can deal with a $15,000 grant from UNDP looking at the relationship between health and environment in your local community. You can have a real scale. What I like about these organizations is if you do a good job and if you can maintain connections with your point of contact, you can get a regular or semi-regular amount of work. Sometimes you can go from one market to multiple markets. And as long as that person stays in place, and I have friends at ILO have been there for 25 years, it's a relationship that will continue to support you, right? You can continually go back maybe for one project a year or one every 2 or 3 years. But there's some consistency there that if you're an organization that's built around programs, you can then start to figure out like, how can I do more? How can I work with more organizations like that? But again, like, it just depends on what your business model needs are. The one that I feel that most entrepreneurs don't look at enough in our space is the role of governments and selling to governments. Many years ago, I looked at developing an elderly app for an iPad. Actually, we're going to develop a whole pad of apps, and our primary buyer was going to be a city. Now, if you imagine, I think now we're talking about a lot of countries and a lot of cities seeing the demographics come down. The reason why I viewed the government as a potential buyer of this was they ultimately support the elderly. They ultimately create the social safety net. So could I solve the government's challenge of limited resources, scaling need, with a technology platform that they would pay for. And again, like it didn't happen, but I got really close in 2 cities. And I think if I was trying that now, it'd be a much easier sell, because at the time I was talking about a problem that would come out 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, the great tsunami in Singapore and in Hong Kong and in Shanghai. But again, like looking at governments and how they might fund some of these, and I'll show you a scorecard in a second, but if you think about any of your countries, your government is balancing a lot of big challenges of water, food, migration, healthcare, education. Can you figure out a product that would be sold to them, because they bring you scale, they also bring you funding, they bring you credibility, and if you can, then you should go after it. You shouldn't always be like, oh no, I won't work with the government. It takes more time. Obviously, politics is involved. Might be more tea you have to drink. But if you view that as something that can really add another peg to your stool, then definitely take a look at that, because I think that's one of the most untapped areas for funding right now. And so I have a whole list of questions here about, when you're building out this model and you're trying to figure out who to talk to, you can look at these and, answer these for yourself. And as you answer those, you can from there figure out who are the groups where you can get funding from that's consistent, that's scalable, that helps you solve your organizational challenge, that really that supports you, and that you enjoy interacting with. Because the other thing I realize is a lot of times as entrepreneurs, there's groups we don't want to work with. We don't want to work with a big corporate because they're the ones who are causing the problem, or we don't want to work with the government because I've got a bad history with that. Like, there's all kinds of reasons so who do you gravitate towards? How can they help you? How can they help you build your organization? And from there, I think that by answering some of these questions, you can really figure out what your business model should be. Now, at the very last part of this, I think it's the most important question, is how do you prove impact as part of your business model? The reason why the 5 successful factors did not involve the business model or the money, and it's a debatable, but is because I feel like if you can get the product, the model, the team, the process, you can show scale, funding is not the problem. Funding will come if you get those things right. But you'll only be able to do that if you can prove that you have it right. So how can you prove the impact that you say you're going to have? And if you can, how can you then leverage that to access different types, larger amounts of funding as a business model? I don't mean as funding and fundraising. Late stage funding and fundraising is all built off your business model, by the way. No one really, sure, there's some funds that really care about your issue and want to, that you're the good person, but at the end of the day, like, they're going to look at your business model. They're going to figure out if you can be profitable. They're going to figure out, can they exit? These are all things that they're going to ask themselves. So you have to be able to prove impact and then align that around the business model's value proposition or your services proposition. And I think these are all really important questions. I saw some questions come up. Let me just get through here. So I work with a group on climate tech coming into China, and this is a consortium of companies. It wasn't one company, so the scorecard is open. And I looked at, like, if you're gonna look at who's gonna be buying your things, this is a great way as climate tech to kind of create segments. And so that's really important. Beyond the big groups that you'll work with, who are the segments within those groups? Like different types of corporates. You have global brands, regional brands, country brands, local brands, public companies, private companies, tech companies, product, all these segments come into play. And so when we're looking at climate tech, we're looking specifically at water, air, and waste, like different types of tech that would come in, both in terms of, like, say, handheld, but then also like backbone type stuff. And I just put together this really simple scorecard for them to help them understand, like, for municipal governments, industrial zones, state-owned enterprises, Chinese national brands, and foreign multinationals, what was driving them to seek out solutions? In what areas were they really looking for solutions? What were barriers to engagement? What were different timelines? Then how could they as solution providers, what were their angles of approach? How could they get into municipal government, embassies and consulates, large events like I think in Hong Kong they had the big philanthropic event. In Singapore they always have some kind of sustainability, water, ESG event. Like, can you go to these big events? Can you be on stage? Can you deliver a message that brings people to you and says, we want to work together? Or a local sales team. You hire someone locally or you get a distributor or an agency to help you through that. And I think like being able to understand who your buyer segment is, what their drivers are, what their needs are, how do you engage them, and then your timeline will also help you understand the business model that you're happy with, that you want to pursue, that you're going to invest behind. Because for like a lot of foreign multinationals, I would argue they come in and they really try and work with other foreign multinationals so that way they can set up a pilot. And the only reason is because if you are delivering, say, water efficiency equipment to Anheuser-Busch in Europe and they like your product, they'll know your product, you'll know their people, the pricing is already there, they're already paying for it, so you know what their price capacity is. You know so much about each other that if you can say, hey, let's do something together in this new market, it's easier than if you were to fly to that new market and go to all the local breweries. So finding those local things. But once you have that beachhead, get to Anheuser-Busch in China or in Thailand, you can then use that as a base to expand into local Thai breweries or into government water companies or into the government's municipal issues. You can use that to level up. But if you're a local Thai, Filipino, Indonesian, perhaps you want to start with Chinese national brands, with local national brands, because you have friends that you went to school with that work there, or because you used to work at one of these brands and you know them well and you understand the pressures they face because your government policies are changing, or the consumers, you really just need to kind of create these segments for yourself and figure out what's the business model here? Because the last column is how much money can you make? What's your margin? How much do you bank? Right? These things all get really important. Okay, I think this is my last slide. Yeah, it is. Okay, so as a last thing, as I mentioned, I've been interviewing entrepreneurs all over Asia and now a little bit more globally about the work they're doing. At first, I was only interviewing entrepreneurs, but then I started interviewing academics, investors, accelerators to understand the ecosystem of people that are supporting. I'm a huge proponent for the work that we're doing, that you're doing. It's worth doing. It's difficult to do. And I hope that through this podcast and through my interaction with you, I've been able to deliver something that will help you get a little bit further along in your own path. I threw up 5 here because I've got 100, but these recently I just thought about Mayuri in Bangkok. She's doing waste, informal waste. And she just had this idea, she came out of a petrochemical company. She saw a problem in her local community. She's I just got to get started. I just have to do something. And then Daniel, he's you have to solve the problem at scale. Don't do anything small. And he talks about how he did it, how he got ADB to give him $50 million, right? It's a huge amount of money. How did he do it? Kian in Malaysia, a good friend of mine from grad school, actually, second largest recycler in Malaysia. We talk about how he's learned about the R&D process of turning plastics into plastics, turning plastics into new materials, the ebb and flow of this conversation, and how to build a business, how to take risk. Andy in the middle there, he is the entrepreneur I mentioned that was the micromanager who nearly burned his entire company down, but realized it fortunately and has now gone through absolute scale. And if you want to learn about team dynamics, watch that. It's a great conversation about self-reflection and learning and the fact that you can absolutely adjust everything, but it might take some time. And then Karen, she's a Korean. She's an impact investor. She doesn't focus on Asia, but my conversation with her was so enlightening about how she is an advocate for entrepreneurs, but she has to temper that with the reality that she is responsible for managing money, and she needs to not just identify the right investments, but also support the investors support the investees that she's working with, and support the development. And she gave some really great context for where she see things, where some gaps are, and the role of an ecosystem to play that. And I think there's just lessons in all these. So, if you like listening to 30-minute conversations or watching it on YouTube, great. There's a lot of content in there. I did that because I don't believe we can have like really surface level conversations, although I probably just delivered one myself. And with that, like I'm happy to answer the questions in the chat. Actually, this is, if you want to follow me, that's my WhatsApp in the bottom. Feel free to connect with me. LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. I've got it all. I'm trying to put it all out there as much as possible, just to kind of help everyone get a little bit further along. So with that, I'll leave this in the background if you guys want to keep looking at it. Let me find a way to get to the chat menu. Okay, so someone's got a lot of questions. All right, so I think she might have left already. And then, yes, Riza, the recording, I believe they're downloading it. I'm actually going to turn it into a clip, and I will send you the majority of this deck. There's a few slides I need to take out, but for the majority, yes, I will be sure to give that to you.